Hi folks, we're Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you're driving along in your car or your truck, or put in those earbuds and sit back and take it all in while you're on public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about modern media, and particularly the news, but modern media generally, and to compare it with the media of 40, 50 years ago. But particularly in the context of that the media, increasingly, the media is losing the confidence of viewers in all categories, of age and socioeconomic background and so on, and is more and more appealing to a small ideological sort of elite rather than being, as in it's now propaganda rather than being news. Now, just to sort of illustrate this, if you look at a women's gossip magazine from say 1970, and you look at the structure of it was all very gossipy. It was fact-free, making wild assertions that men will never understand how we suffer, and those sorts of things, and with this tone of moral superiority when they make these insane assertions. But that was a women's gossip magazine. No one took it seriously. It was rubbish. It was crap. Nobody sort of gave it a second thought, but it was there. And now that same structure, if you read a column or a story from a women's gossip magazine from 1970, then you read supposed news today, the supposedly factual news today. I challenge you to tell the difference between the two structurally. It's based on assertion, ideology, sort of girly moral superiority. None of it is based on fact and sober reflection on the facts. And as the women's magazine, gossip magazines were fact-free in 1970, so all the news is today. Increasingly, factual stories have been replaced by activist editorial, by activists purporting to be or masquerading as journalists. And just looking at Australia's largest news organisation, and out of the 31 stories on the front page, this is the online version, but 31 stories on the front page, only 5 are factual, and they're just recording a fact, such as there was a landslide in such and such a place, and 61 people died. And that's just a fact. On this, it happened on this date at this time in this place. But the rest of the stories, 26 of the 31, are all editorial. And as a group, 5 of those are just straight out hit pieces against Donald Trump. Straight out hit pieces, no attempt at objectivity or presenting facts, just straight out ideological hit pieces. So that's how far the news has sunk. Now, I'll go back in time a little bit here. This is when I was at high school. There was I think it was part of some social studies class, and I think it started in maybe second year or third year high school, somewhere around there. And we had to pick articles in the news, like cut out. So this is pre-internet, of course. So cut out like newspaper cuttings and then discuss those stories. Write short essay. I think it was less than 100 words or something. A short essay, and then get up in front of the class and talk about that article. Now, at the time, I could separate the difference between, say, my mother had women's gossip magazines in the house, and so because they were right there, and I didn't have to go and get a newspaper, I thought, I'll have a look. And I remember looking at those, thinking, no, they're, and even as a 13-year-old or something, I was looking at it, going, no, that's rubbish. I can't use that. There are no facts in this that I can talk about. So I had to go and get a newspaper or hustle the folks to go and get a newspaper. And there was one newspaper that prided itself on being a journal of record, and I'll come back to that shortly because I knew a journalist working there later on. And so I ended up getting hold of that. But in order to do the presentation to the class and discuss or do the short essay, I had to rely on facts. So I was able to say, okay, this is factual, and I can quote that as a fact, not as just an assertion that has no. Now I noticed even back then that the girls in the class, it was co-ed school, the girls in the class would take would select the gossip column type stories, and then they would sort of fantasize and go into a deluded state over what it might mean. And it was something that women do. It was the follow-up progression of what the greatest fear is. So you know, if you go, well, this person doesn't disagrees with mass migration, that was the same as the Nazis, so they are a Nazi. And if they're a Nazi, it means they must be Hitler. And if they're Hitler, it means they must be into genocide. And if they're into genocide, and so on. So this is, I noticed even as a kid, this was a sort of type of thinking that women would engage in, that there was, A would lead to B, which would lead to C, but it was on the basis as a paranoid, irrational worst fears. And I remember, some of my mother's friends, when they were talking about things like, the idea is that men should be forced to, if he gets her pregnant, he should be forced to marry and forced to pay and forced to do this, forced to do that, forced to, the government must make him do it at gunpoint if necessary, because if the government doesn't do that, then Hitler will emerge. And so even back then, when I was a kid, those were the sort of sentiments that women would express, and the gossip columns of the women's magazines pandered to that sort of type of mentality. And given the sales, the successful sales of these women's magazines, then you can only assume that sort of worked. Now, even in the women's magazines, not all of the magazine was that sort of editorial. There are other things that in there, like recipes and things like, I don't know, sewing tips or crocheting or knitting, or there were other things in there, but the gossip column side of it was was pretty big. So anyway, I didn't have any trouble in the newspapers, the media, the mainstream media generally. Now, given you had to bring copy into school to do the class, I couldn't use things like on the TV, for example, or the radio or whatever. But so I had no trouble finding these articles. But again, it surprised me that the girls, in majority, some didn't, but in majority would always go for the gossip column stuff. I thought, why would they do that? And the teacher didn't really hold them to account, but didn't treat them that seriously. So the boys came in with the factual stuff, which was dealt with more seriously than the stuff that the girls came in. Anyway, fast forward now. There was a newspaper in Australia that was considered to be the Journal of Record, and I've mentioned this in other videos. I knew a journalist there, like he was a cadet journalist, and went on to become quite a prominent journalist, covering sort of national stories. But he when he was like a trainee or a cadet, that they were sending him out to pretty basic stuff, like he would go to a dog judging contest or a cake baking contest, things like that. And so that was the beginning stuff they gave him. And he, I was having met up with him in the city. The newspaper offices were right downtown in the city, and we met up. And he was telling me about a few times he said how he got hauled over the coals by the editors for getting something wrong. Now remember, this newspaper, this media outlet, took pride in being a journal of record. If they said it, it was unquestionably true, irrefutably true. You could rely on whatever they said as being 100% ironclad. Now, this was back in the day, of course. It's not now, definitely not now. But he mentioned a couple of ones where he went to a dog judging contest, and it was meant to be I don't know, a French poodle or something that won some prize, and he said it was a Belgian poodle or I don't know, a Dutch poodle or something, something that was hardly a big deal. But he got dragged into the editor's office and given a given a good shellacking over that, because you didn't get the facts absolutely right. We are a journal of record. That you must get the facts 100% right. You didn't. Sure, it was close. You got poodle right. It was the right part of the world, and it was the dog training school was owned by a Belgian guy, but it was a French poodle, not a Belgian. So for a minor oversight like that, and they printed a correction. It was such a big deal as they saw it. They had to print a correction over whether it was a French or a Belgian fucking poodle, for goodness sakes. Such was their emphasis on they are a journal of record. On another one, he was sent out. This would have been around the same time, certainly when he was still a cadet. Anyway, he was sent out to do a cake baking thing, or just like some politician's wife was going to go to this cake judging thing. So it became a news item because of that. They sent him out to cover it, and he was instead of he got it was. I don't know, it was an orange and poppy seed cake, and he said it was an orange cake and missed out the poppy seed bit. So, for example, I can't remember the flavour of the cake, by the way, but he missed out. I remember it was the poppy seeds he missed out. I remember that. So he missed out that it was the poppy. Again, he got dragged in and got a big. In fact, he got a lot of trouble over that one. So he says or said, and. Again, it was you got the facts wrong. We deal with facts. We are a journal of record. Now, those days are long gone. The media no longer does that. As I said, the main media outlet in Australia here has, out of the 31 top stories, 26 of them are editorial pieces. Facts are definitely not what's on the table. Now, there are a few things, I guess, that came along to shape media, but factually was with online media, the fact side of it can come out very quickly. So the mainstream media will always be behind the curve. By the time the facts come in, the journalist gets allocated to cover it. They check the story and and then they put the article out in print. Then they're already 24 hours behind. It's old news at this point. The facts of the matter. There was the volcano blew up and killed 100 people. That those facts were already out there. They're too late for it. So they have to, and I think any media outlet would do this, realizing, well, we can't play in the facts game anymore because we're always 24 hours behind the curve, or X amount of hours behind the curve. So what we have to do is we have to turn the news into stories. And these stories in turn were taken over by the globalists to say, well, those stories now have to be propaganda in the same way that Pravda and so on was in the Soviet Union or in any authoritarian regime. The media is what they decide you're allowed to consume, and we see that today all across the media landscape. The globalists are telling us what we can consume, how we are to understand what we consume and what we must think about it, and whether, and if they omit facts or invent facts, or you just create facts through assertion, which is what they primarily do, then that's what we consume. Now, I was thinking about how much of the for example, television. How much television do I watch now? And I haven't watched, other than a couple of some friends of ours who've got a full-on cable TV set up, and they've got all sorts of stuff there, movies, other than that, which we watch with them. But in terms of news and information, current affairs, that sort of stuff, we haven't watched TV for fuck knows how long. Now, we do see online, there may be a quick grab from what CNN said, or I don't know, any of the mainstream media outlets, or quoting a New York Times. So there is an indirect and reduced level of consumption. But because the media is so woefully unreliable and so riddled with propaganda, Trump hate syndrome, the whole thing, it's not worth looking at it. You know what you're seeing is not accurate. You know what you're seeing consuming is not fact-based. It's ideological and propaganda-based. So it's just not worth looking at it. So I might as well go online, as the majority of the Western population do now, and seek out the facts for myself. Now, it means that I have to spend more time doing it. Not everybody has that time. Someone's had a long day at work, they come back, they just want to switch on the TV, and while they're fixing their dinner, they've got the TV on in background, so they're consuming it sort of indirectly. And it's really just music in the background, I suppose, information music. So they're not going to be too discerning over accuracy. And well, hold on, they're not going to look at the news critically and say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't add up. For example, there was a quick grab that I saw earlier on today, where Trump said that the people from the third who want to come just for a better life are evil. Then quick shot of Hitler, and then so really he's now that is brazen misrepresentation. Not only what Trump said, but its significance and what it means. Someone had to sit down with that intention to deceive, and that's what disqualifies the mainstream media from certainly my patronage. They're hell bent on deceit and lies and propaganda and misinformation, while accusing everyone else of doing misinformation. So I've noticed that the mainstream media, that whatever they accuse you of is what they are doing. But that's why has the media lost its following? It's because it won't stop telling lies, and brazenly so. Of course, it's losing its grip. The thing about the Soviet Union and their propaganda machine, which is an interesting sort of study in itself, is the authoritarian Soviet government believed, because they controlled all the news and people could only consume the news that they were given, that therefore everybody was brainwashed. When in reality, more than 2 out of 3 people didn't believe any of the news. It was all they had to consume, but they didn't believe it. And because the authoritarian control of the news was so total, they became more and more brazen in the lies they were telling. And then people became less and less confident in the information they were being given. So in the end, the much to the shock of the communist administrators, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they couldn't believe that so many people didn't believe the news they were being fed. And we see that same thing with the globalists today. They seem confused. Well, why do you not believe the lies we tell you? That's it. We have to censor everybody else, and then we'll have control of the narrative. And they're rather missing the point that the more lies you tell, the less control of the narrative you actually get. So it becomes a reverse to the way they think they can engineer delivery of news information and the extent to which it'll penetrate the minds of the populace. Also, there's a repackaging of the news into, say, late night comedy shows or talk shows and things like that, so they can deliver the propaganda in sort of separate or different platforms, also through educational institutions and so on. But again, they are getting traction, but not to the extent they think they are. And the more control they exercise, the more they're encouraged to tell the most outrageous and ridiculous lies, and then the less control they end up having. You've been fantastic to start your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.